Emma, and I'm a senior at Berkeley studying biology. It's really great to be here with you tonight. I'm going to be the student moderator for tonight's event. And Lillian, thank you so much for being here. It's really a pleasure to have you at the forum today.
Thank you so much. It's such a surreal experience to come back to campus because I was a student here in Haas literally 2 years ago. So it's such a 360 moment to come back. So very, very grateful that everyone showed up today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone that we'll have an audience Q&A session at the end of our conversation. So if you have a question for Lillian, just save it until then. But yeah, so starting off, our first topic is going to be about the evolution of your online presence and your content creation throughout the years. So your content has experienced many major shifts throughout the years. You started doing Berkeley vlogs and then transitioned into like job search advice content and corporate life videos. These days, a lot of your content focuses on giving advice and tips about financial literacy. So how has the evolution of your content helped you find its current form?
Yes, so I think it was especially during COVID when I started experimenting more with like social media trends and stuff, mostly because of like COVID shutdown and how we were stuck at home. But essentially, I actually started my content creation journey when I was like in middle school. I used to make like these stuffed animals and would sell them to people on YouTube and through Etsy and stuff. So I always felt like I had like an enjoyment for like art and content for a really long time since childhood. And throughout high school, I sort of stopped doing it because of like college apps and studying and stuff. But especially when I had more free time during school, I want to explore more of like my creative interests. This was when I was in my like junior, senior years. At the time, like job recruitment, the professional sides of things of what I was going to do after graduating from Berkeley was really like something I thought about a lot. So at the time, I found myself talking a lot about like internships, like jobs, and those types of topics in my clubs, like when I talked to other students who were also aspiring down a similar path. And I found that it was a lot more fruitful to, put the same information in video form so it can reach thousands of people instead of having to like repeat the same information like one-on-one, and like time is not unlimited in a sense, so this is more of an efficient way to, put my message out there to a wider audience. So that's kind of what started it. I made a lot of Berkeley vlogs and job search tips since those were things that were part of my daily life and I thought about a lot. I also focused on what I was good at talking about, so I think those were a lot of my like strength areas. So I graduated from Cal in 2022, sort of transitioning on from school life to professional and work life, and essentially I wanted to incorporate content into my life instead of making life the content, if that makes sense. So I try to find ways to incorporate like learnings and just my experience going from a college student to a new grad and like sort of documenting that, both as ways to sort of like see back on my life maybe 5 years from now, being like, oh, my life looked like this back then, having a memory, as well as sharing my thoughts and experiences with other people. So yeah, in terms of the financial literacy aspect, that was something that I've also been interested for, I'd say, a longer period of time. When I was in college, I'd watch a lot of like Graham Stephan videos, like those YouTubers in the space, and there's not a lot of like female representation in that space as well. So when I got more experience with like internships and my job, I was like, oh, we teach people how to get the job. That's sort of like what my content's been about for a long time. But no one really talks about what to do with the earnings from your job or your career. So that was another aspect of sort of like the professional life that I want to touch on. And it's been a bigger part of my content today as well.
Thank you for sharing that. So something that you talked about like in your answer is you discussed how you share a lot of this advice and you give this information freely to people. But that's really interesting because you grew up and you went to school and now you work in the Bay Area, which is like notoriously competitive. And I feel like your content is very much the antithesis of that because it's very non-gatekeeping. Like you're sharing this information for free with everyone. Like how has this upbringing and your experience in the Bay Area like affected your desire to publish content that shares helpful information?
Yeah, so in terms of my upbringing, I grew up in a city called Cupertino. It's like near San Jose. I think it's like very known to be like very academic focused or just like grinding all the time. So I think partly that upbringing has made me very like professionally driven and focused, just like a lot of like Berkeley kids that, you know, like attend our school and stuff. So I've been very close to that. And so can you repeat the second half of your question?
Yeah, like how has your upbringing influenced this desire to share helpful content with others?
Yeah, so I think because of like the environment that, you know, the Bay Area sort of fosters, there's a lot of sort of sense of like a lot of people trying to, you know, get to a certain place. And I think alongside that, a lot of like voices get lost in that space, and not everyone's families and upbringings are different as well. So I think there is a lot of information that certain people kind of come into college or any higher institution knowing, while other groups may not have this information. So I think it's really important to share information, at least from my perspective, like as I'm moving along the path, trying to approach it more of like a peer to friend sort of relationship. Like it's like, oh, I'm going through this. Maybe the person watching is also near this journey, maybe one step behind, but we're sort of like on the same, you know, like everyone goes through their 20s and find their first job and trying to navigate what life is like after graduating college, because it feels very unknown when you're like not at that stage yet. So I hope to be a figure or a voice that sort of like guides like my friends along this journey. So that's why I tried to aim.
Yeah, thank you. You talked a little bit about how you kind of approach content creation as like talking to a community or a group of friends instead of just like giving out cold information. How does that, do you feel like that comes across in things that you make?
Can you clarify what you mean by the second part?
Yeah, like what approaches do you take to make your content more relatable or approachable to others?
For sure. I think there are several aspects to this. First is sharing more about like what your day-to-day life is like in the stage you're at right now, because I feel like even when you're sharing information about your life is not, like the experiences that I'm experiencing are not completely unique to me. There are other people also experiencing similar things. So from that aspect is sort of like trying to capture the relatability of sharing those experiences and hopefully drawing an audience that relates to what I'm experiencing as well. In terms of like sharing my experience, things I've learned, trying to explain it in a way of like, oh, this is what I've learned so far in the last year or few months, and this is what I've came to the conclusion to, and sort of like sharing it as like a friend to friend versus maybe someone who is a bit more experienced might explain it to you as like a teacher figure, but I want to explain it more as like peer to peer, having more of a close relationship.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of your content on financial literacy is directed towards Gen Z. So like what message do you hope to say about financial literacy to like Gen Z or people in our audience today?
For sure. So I think in terms of more like tactical things, something that I wish I started earlier was just like being more open to learning about like financial literacy. Just because when I was starting in college, I was like, oh, I'm still like starting out, I'm just studying, I don't really have much of an income right now, so that is like super far away. But I think in reality, if you start like picking up on information slowly, by the time comes where you're like, oh, this could be very useful now, you've already like put some practice in when you were in your earlier years. And so it comes more naturally, you pick up things more quickly and you could be more prepared. So I think that's definitely something that I've like learned over the last few years. But in terms of financial literacy in general, I think we see a big trend on social media and TikTok where people are constantly influencing you to buy all these things, and I fall into the trap of that too all the time. But no one really talks about like the actual, like, the money psychology behind those things and what we should prioritize when we are young, and sort of trying to be that voice for people who are interested in that subject.
Yeah, that seems really important, especially in today's age, as you talked about, like the rise of hyperconsumerism and things like that. So I think for a lot of people, maybe getting started in the finance world can be a little bit overwhelming, or it can be hard to know where to start. So like, how did you get started, or how do you recommend that other people do so?
Yes, when I was in my undergrad, or like more like underclassmen years, I watched a lot of YouTube videos. So I mentioned like Graham Stephan. There's also some other YouTubers I watched as well. I also watched a lot of like vloggers and people who were near my age or stage of life who also sort of touch on these topics. So it was great to hear about that perspective from other people in a similar like stage of life. And then when I was a junior, I also took this class at Haas called UGBA 135, which is personal finance. I'm not sure if they still offer it now. I believe they offer it like once. They offer
got some
okay.
people in the class.
They offer it once. When I was a student, they offered it once a year in the spring semester. So that might be like a rotational class that is, yeah, once a year, I believe. So I took that class, which was pretty helpful, and it broadened my perspective as well. So yeah, I'd say mostly like online consumption. I don't think my parents really talked much about finances when I was growing up. I kind of just figured it out on my own and then teaching myself. So yeah.
Really interesting. In terms of the personal finance class, are there things that you learned in that class that you still like talk about in your content today?
Yeah, I think the big ones that are like the most hard hitting are usually the ones around like your employer, like certain benefits that are offered that you should take advantage of. I didn't really know about this topic when I was still a student, but I think once you like are entering that space, there is a lot of jargon and things that not even like your manager will tell you. You could just kind of have to figure it out because, like, yeah, your manager doesn't tell you. It's there, but you just have to find it, I guess. Yeah.
Did you experience like some of that transition going from like graduating from Berkeley and starting your job at Google?
I would say there was definitely a learning curve between. Are you saying like the actual job, or?
Yeah, like you talked about like being a little overwhelmed by jargon, or like not knowing how to like read the like financial fine print kind of a job.
Yeah, so there was a lot of like new things I was learning. I'd say I've done a fair bit of research beforehand, so I emphasize like starting early. I think that really helps a lot because even though you might not be thinking about those things at this current moment, by the time rolls around, like you are aware of what's out there and what's happening when you like get to that point. So I think it's been really helpful to do that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Well, you came here today with like some exciting news to share with us, and yeah, so I just wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about your new project and your upcoming plans.
Yeah, so this is something that I haven't really shared on my social media, but essentially we've been talking a lot about financial literacy and how that applies to Gen Z, and how there is a lot of personal finance content information out there, but in terms of like writing or the publishing space, there are a lot of books that are very broad, but not focused on the Gen Z audience and like speaking to Gen Z like a friend. So it's very exciting to share more, but essentially a publisher reached out to me to publish a book deal together on financial literacy for the Gen Z audience. So I'm currently working on that. It's going to be like a pretty long project that I think will be very exciting and useful for people in our generation. And it's going to be published in December of 2025. So we have a long ways to go, but I'm currently in the process of working on it right now.
That's super exciting. Congratulations. Yeah, I guess talking a little bit more about your view of like finance, especially from a Gen Z perspective, what aspects of finance do you think especially need to be emphasized like to the younger generation?
I think a lot of it is because a lot of the current financial books don't really talk about the unique things that Gen Z has gone through in terms of like the economy, like COVID-19, how that's affected a lot of people's timelines, the job market, inflation. Back in our parents' or grandparents' generation, people needed only one income to comfortably buy a house, buy a car, and now we have a lot of student loan debt. It's not easy to do those things as the previous generations have been. So I think I'm trying to focus more of my like thoughts and sort of outlook for Gen Z and how to sort of adjust to these new conditions that previous generations haven't, and trying to speak to Gen Z on like a friend to friend, someone who's experienced that very recently, and not someone who's kind of like talking down to you, or someone who is like very, I guess, not aware or in touch with what Gen Z is currently going through right now.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Yeah, congratulations on that, and looking forward to your book.
Thank you.
But yeah, so now I wanted to talk a little bit with you about your life in the corporate world, because while you have your content creation, you also have a job at Google. And the corporate environment can be quite formal and professional and polished, which like contrasts pretty sharply with the life of an influencer, where you try and be more relatable and share like personal anecdotes. So how do you balance professionalism at work while managing an online persona?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think actually it is a lot more common these days to have people who are working in a corporate environment and doing something on the side with the rise of like TikTok and Instagram and all the social platforms. In terms of maintaining a professional sort of line between like working for a bigger company and my side work, I think a lot of it comes down to, I wouldn't like talk about something online if I weren't comfortable having someone from work seeing it. So I think that mentality helps a lot with like, if I post this, I have to do like a mental scan of, does this pass like the checks in my brain of like who's gonna see this or not. So I think that's a big thing. I would say I try to aim my content to be pretty, I guess, brand safe. So keeping like pretty safe in terms of like topics I talk about and certain things that I mention in my content and such. So, but I think because I work in marketing, a lot of the like skills in like social media, like writing, heavily transfer to one another. So I do think that the skills are quite transferable, and from doing social media and content marketing, it's also helped a lot with my thinking and my work at my corporate job, and vice versa as well.
Yeah, it's cool to hear about the balance between your personal and your professional life. And yeah, I also wanted to ask about, like how you balance those two mindsets kind of further, because you seem very goal-oriented. Obviously, you have a lot of things going on. And like being young and in the corporate environment can be pretty overwhelming. So how do you like balance enjoying yourself in the current moment while also having this like goal-oriented mindset?
Yes, I am very grateful for the fact that I think at certain organizations, there is an emphasis on like cohort-based learning. So you are learning with other people at your like current stage of life and in a similar role as you. So I'm very grateful that there's like kind of a social community that's being fostered at work, kind of built in. So I think I get a lot of my like interactions from there as well. In terms of boundaries, I think that's something that I have a little bit trouble with ever since I was like growing up into Berkeley. I've always like kind of had this feeling of like, oh, if I'm not constantly achieving or working on something or being productive, I feel like I'm wasting my time, which is not a healthy mindset to have. But I'm trying to be better at that and like setting more boundaries to like working and doing other things other than like productive. Not everything has to be productive all the time. So that's something that I'm trying to like be better at in terms of having a more balanced life.
Yeah, I think that's pretty relatable for a lot of people in this room. So how did you get to the point where you've had that kind of mindset shift in terms of productivity?
I definitely think it's very gradual. I didn't like wake up one day and be like, oh, I'm like working too much and I should change my thinking around it. But I think like for me, I've always been like in pursuit of a goal, right? Like in high school, it's like, oh, I need to get into XYZ school. And then when I got to school, I need to get XYZ job. And I think when you finally like do all those things that you set out to do, and then now you're sort of like in the place that you wished for, and then suddenly the world kind of opens up more widely, and you're like, oh, like what do I actually want? Like, is this it? And trying to think more broadly of like what my lifestyle should look like instead of just focusing on that one goal and constantly like worrying whether I like have done enough or like gotten all the things I wanted, or that it's like a hamster wheel mindset. So I think now it's kind of like, oh, like in pursuit of your goals, like you should also feel like happy while you're in pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, for sure. What kind of goals do you have for yourself now that you've kind of like gotten off that hamster wheel?
I'm trying to invest more in like health and exercise, because when I was in high school and university, I didn't have like any specific like sports or like exercise routines that I've picked up. So I'm trying to do like broadening my perspective on that. Like I've signed up for like Pilates memberships, like how to play golf, and like trying to do new things like more physically, keep myself more like physically stimulated. So those are like some of the things I've been focusing more time on, and then also just like making new friends like in my day-to-day life now and outside of like what used to be college.
That's really great to hear. Gives me hope. Yeah, so kind of nearing the end of our conversation, I wanted to ask you a little bit about like your reflections through content creation over the years. You've been active in the space for a pretty long time, like starting with your YouTube videos documenting your college years. So what has the experience of growing a following and running your account taught you about yourself?
Wow, that sounds like kind of a deep question. I think as I've documented my life and my experiences, I think no matter what stage you are, like in your like school or life or career, I think there's always value in sharing your thoughts and expressing yourself, because I think I used to think like when I was in college, like, oh, like why am I qualified to talk about something? I'm too young to talk about XYZ, like why would people want to listen to me? And I feel like even if you have something small to share, like there are people who will relate to you and like resonate with you on those things, and people who also want to just see your journey and just your growth as a person, and not necessarily like, oh, you have to be qualified to talk about a certain topic, or you have to be like some sort of trait that you think is whatever that may be. So I've learned that just like sharing information and just being able to take people along your journey with you has been very inspiring. I've learned so much from like my audience as well about myself.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear. Going off the theme of advice, you are working in big tech now, which is like notoriously selective, and I think maybe many people in this audience would be interested in breaking into that kind of industry. So as a recent Haas graduate, what advice do you have for students aspiring to follow a similar path as you?
Yeah, I think everyone has their own path and their own timeline, so this is like a very unique journey to you. And I don't think there is definitely not like a mold or formula in terms of like your career path in general. I guess I can talk about like some tactical things that I've learned throughout my experience. This is just my opinion, not like a fact or anything. But essentially, I think when you like I say work on your projects or talk about your experiences. Well, actually, the first thing I would say is like grades aren't everything, especially when it comes to like more career-oriented fields. I'd say like in terms of my grades in Berkeley and in Haas, they're definitely like below average in terms of like, I think what most people at Berkeley were like scoring when I was a student. And I focused a lot of my time on like crafting a story and a narrative by myself, like thinking about things that were like unique to me or like really unique experiences that I've had over my like activities or just things I've experienced, and like really emphasizing that has helped a lot. And yeah, I'd say like find the thing that makes you unique and talk about that when you are like recruiting or on the career journey and stuff. I'd also say in terms of recruiting itself, it's best to start early, because something that I didn't realize until I was like near my junior year is that a lot of the companies are like recruiting like in July, August, September, the year before the internship cycle starts for the next summer. So I think that's something that's not really widely known about, but it's something that's also very important. And yeah, I'd say those are like some of the top things I've learned throughout the last few years about this process.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So to close out the moderated portion of our event, I'd like to ask you some fun rapid fire questions. So just answer with the first thing that comes to your mind.
Oh, this makes me nervous.
What's your biggest financial tip?
Open a high yield savings account.
What's your best advice for starting content creation?
Just do it. Don't think too much. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it.
Your favorite Berkeley library?
I'd say dough.
Okay. Something that you want to learn?
Something I want to learn?
Yeah.
Probably, actually, pickleball, probably.
Oh, let's go.
It's been very trendy.
Yeah. Your favorite hobby?
Lately, it's actually been those like diamond drawings that have like this sticky, it's like paint by numbers, but you stick them on. It's been fun.
Yeah, they're so sparkly. Your latte recipe?
Vietnamese coffee with milk, cinnamon, and a few drops of maple syrup.
Oh, that sounds so good. Dream job when you were a kid?
Honestly, I didn't really have one.
Do you have a dream job now?
Honestly, like being a travel content creator or something.
Oh, that'd be so. Where do you want to go?
I'd love to do an Asia trip.
Oh, very cool. And your current obsession?
Current obsession. I've been seeing a lot of like cat memes on TikTok lately, so I always get those when I'm scrolling.
Very cool. Thank you so much. Everyone give a big round of applause for Lillian. Okay, guys, so now we're going to move into the audience Q&A portion. So if you have a question for Lillian, raise your hand and I'll call on you. Yeah, Jess.
Thank you for speaking with us tonight. I was curious, since a lot of your content is like centered on financial literacy, I was curious what like steered you more into the product marketing space, especially since I know like that section of marketing can be like very specific to tech. So I was curious about that.
Oh, that's a great question. I feel like when I was in Berkeley, I was definitely interested in like a variety of things. Like I was looking into finance, I was looking into like marketing, but I think a lot of it came down to talking to my peers of what they were sort of doing at the time. I looked up to a lot of people who were 1 or 2 years older than me and seeing like what was out there. And at the time, I've seen some of my peers who were in marketing and asking them what their experiences were. So I think that was a big part of me like applying to certain internships and ultimately going with the one that I went at the time. But I'd say in terms of my experience now that I've actually been through it, I think it's a very, like product marketing, believe is a very broad term. Like a lot of people who are in the space can do a lot of different things depending on the team you're on. I'd say for me right now, like even though my title is product, a lot of the, I guess like tasks that we are doing are more events focused. So like showing the products on like trade shows or like webinars and things like that. So I think it differs a lot in terms of teams and such, but it was very helpful talking to alumni and upperclassmen at the time who were in those roles and helped me understand more of what it was about and what it was like.
What's your biggest advice to aspiring content creators? Or like what, and like as well as like what your mindset was, especially when you're starting?
Yes, definitely. I think a big part of it was like just starting, because when I was first going through content, I thought a lot about like, oh, the exact things I should be putting out and like trying to perfect this image in my mind of like what I want things to look like. But I think the more that you like do versus think makes the process a lot, not process, I would just say like your experience a lot more fun, I'd say. And I'd also say in terms of consistency, I started out by like posting a lot and as often as I could. And once I got more comfortable with the content that I was talking about, pivoted more towards quality. So I think that approach has worked out pretty well, but I'd say my biggest advice is just to start and to not overthink too much.
I have a question. It's like a long. So, what's your favorite class? What's a class you've taken within your major that has been your favorite and also transformative in terms of professional and personal growth? Also, that is outside of your major that you feel like you still are using till this day.
Oh wow, I feel like that's a three-part question. Wait, let me think about it. I'd say I've taken some decals and other classes outside of my major that were applicable, but I didn't take too many classes, I'd say, outside of my major at the time. There were some classes that were like more applicable to sort of like my day-to-day roles now, mostly around like marketing electives. I think it was UGBA 147, and it was a lot of like, they would bring in a lot of like small business owners and their products, and we would like analyze like how they were like positioning them to their customers and sort of like more applicable classes, because I think a lot of the classes I took before that, or just in general at Cal, were very like theoretical and like equations and stuff that I necessarily wouldn't be thinking about once I finished the finals. So I think taking more like application classes, I was able to see myself in more of like, oh, what does my day-to-day in like my future like roles and stuff looks over than just like theory and things like that. So I'd say like a lot of those classes have really helped.
What do you find to be the most like gratifying part about being a content creator? Have there been like any experiences in specific that have made you been like, wow, I'm really glad that I've chosen this like path to go down?
Yeah, I think it's super, feels very fulfilling in a sense. I'd say like, as for context, I think when you're like, you know, in the corporate world, you can feel like oftentimes, or at least from my experience, like you're like a very, very small part of something. And when I make content about my own experiences and sharing like that part of my life with others, and I get messages from people who are like, oh, like this has been really helpful, or I've used your resources and it's helped me like get a job or something. It's like, oh wow, it feels like I made an impact on someone's life, versus like at a corporation, it can really feel like, oh, you're like a really small part of something that no one really like knows that you're a part of necessarily. So I really like I really enjoy the one-on-one interaction I had with people and seeing like, oh, it's like possible for anybody to make an impact on someone else's life. So I think just like being able to help people like me has been very fulfilling.
Would you recommend being a content creator to a person who doesn't actually like using TikTok, for example, viewing it personally? And I mean that in the sense of like that like Instagram Reels, YouTube Reels. There's so many like alternatives for right now that if someone doesn't personally invest a lot of time in the app TikTok, do you think that affects as a whole your ability to be a content creator?
I think there are so many ways to go about this. Like, there are a lot of people who write as their content, and I think that's something that is a great option for a lot of people. Like, for example, if you're like writing on Medium, or if you have your own blogs or like email newsletters. I guess in terms of like Instagram as a platform, like that's a very strong platform. And I know not everyone likes to show their face on the internet or like too much personal information. Also seeing like a lot of like anonymous blogs and other things that you can do. So I think there's not just like a one box fits everybody, situation, but it just depends on what you're interested in and comfortable with, I feel like.
I actually watched a lot of your videos when I was applying to HOT, so thank you for those.
Oh my god.
So you've been balancing being a content creator and a full-time student, and now you also have a full-time job on top of being a content creator. Do you have any like time management tips or things that you keep in mind to like balance all of your activities?
Yes, I would say I try to stay organized, but sometimes I let that slip when things get really overwhelming. But in terms of like, I suppose like balancing like a full-time job with all the side stuff, I try to batch a lot of the content stuff. For example, like I would try to script or outline the videos on one day, and then on a different day I would film the videos, and on a different day I would edit the videos. So trying to like systemize or compartmentalize like certain tasks that are more repetitive. I would say, yeah, it is a lot of work. Like I'm definitely like very grateful. I'm like choosing to take on a lot of these commitments, but I think it comes down just to like what you want to spend your time on at the end of the day. Like I don't socialize as much because I spend a lot of time like doing all these things, but it just comes down to like your values and what you enjoy doing.
I know like a lot of people think about tech, like they think about it being like really stressful, and there are people who would transition to, in a situation like yours, they would transition like full-time social media once they have like a good account that's running, and then you have a lot of followers. And you also mentioned I wanted to be a traveler, like travel content career. So is that something that you like sort of see yourself doing, transitioning to content full time? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a really great question actually. I think my mind has like crossed this question at some point, but I feel like as someone who is still learning a lot, like I'm only 2 years out, I think there is a lot to be learned from the corporate side of things and just gaining more experience and learning from people who are much more experienced than me. But I definitely wouldn't close off future opportunities where I could take the leap to something of my own full time. But I'd also say like, I guess for me, I don't think it's very relatable to most people if you're just like a full-time creator. I think people are very interested in seeing like your life just like without content being the main focus and the lessons that you've learned throughout. And I think that's a lot more interesting than full-time content creator. At least that's my perspective right now. I'm not sure that will change in the near future, but I'm still trying to use the opportunity to learn as much as possible from many different perspectives and people. And I think it also helps that when you are in like the corporate space, you have more like face-to-face interactions every day, while some of my content creator peers who kind of do this all the time, I say like some of them say there's not a lot of social interaction. So I think for now, I think there's a lot to learn from both worlds.
I guess reflecting on your time at Berkeley, like as a student, navigating clubs and organizations, especially like as a host student, like the culture of like competitive consulting clubs and things like that. What type of like organizations do you feel helped you navigate your journey, or like led you to your eventual job at Google as a product marketer?
I joined a few organizations throughout school. The biggest ones, or the ones I spent the most time in, were Daily Cal on like their marketing team, and then Microfinance, which was like a small business club that I joined. And I think it was just like meeting different people from like different spaces and forming like a mentorship relationship with a few of them. And I think a lot of it is by chance. Like you meet some people that you really vibe with, and they kind of like bring you along their like journey. Like for example, like advice on Haas apps and like referrals or advice on like job search stuff. So I think it was just more about like going to a lot of different events and trying to find people that I got along with and ultimately became friends with. And I think at the end of the day, it's just like about like building relationships with people and just like making friends with people who are like like-minded and share similar interests.
I have a question. So right now, I like to make YouTube videos, but I found like a big struggle is like the editing process takes a long time. So I'm wondering, like, how much time does it take for you to edit a reel, and then how do you push out such a large quantity of content, and keeping that timeline consistent?
For sure. So actually, Jeffrey used to be a Haas alum like me as well. So we were in the same class year. So thanks for supporting. I actually edit a lot of my videos on CapCut, which is like a free app that I believe is owned by the same company as TikTok is. And I feel like I try to not overcomplicate things too much. Like my editing isn't like super like all like graphic-y, animated, top tier editing. I feel like I just like to do like simple cuts in like some graphics and captions, or like text and captions. So I think because I don't focus like too heavily on like transitions and stuff, I think it's easier to push out content. But I can imagine like if you're someone who likes to make things like look really nice and aesthetic, that can definitely take a lot longer. But I think the more you do it, like it faster, you can learn different shortcuts and like commands and stuff that makes it a bit faster. But yeah, it is very time consuming.
We have time for one more question.
Did you ever struggle with like burnout, like feeling like you had to put on a face for your videos or like for your reels?
That's a good question. I'd say I definitely faced burnout, but if I like really wasn't feeling it, I wouldn't like force myself to like be on the camera and like talk and stuff. I think there are definitely like a lot of periods where it feels like it's too overwhelming, and then I need to like either slow down a bit or it's like affecting my mental health too much. So I've been trying to like not force myself to do certain things when my body's not keeping up. So I try to keep that balance.
Awesome. So that concludes our event, but everybody give a big round of applause.